Okay, so hello, my name is Andrzej Kubik. Currently, I work for Motorola Solutions as software and solutions architect, and sometimes I also do other curious stuff there. So to get you kind of into what we will talk about today, I want to kind of tell you a story. And that story would work perfectly if my kind of remote would work. Okay, that's so. This is a story about me. So a couple of years ago, I decided to connect my two phones, so business phone and private phone, into one because it was pointless to wear two. Actually, I still have two, but that's the other point. So I decided that at some point that okay, I will go for the Android. This was a couple years ago, so remember about that. So I decided to take an Android phone, right, as my baseline. It's kind of an obvious choice. And here comes my wife, right? So she was thinking about buying something like that, right? It was actually an older model from this company, and it didn't have Android. It had their own kind of custom software on it, but it looked pretty. It was perfect for her, right? I was trying to convince her, this is not a very good choice. You won't be able to share the same applications. You won't be able to choose from either iOS or Android. Don't bother. It never works that way. So obviously, she bought it, right? Couple of months later, I was also searching for a new phone. I had to kind of renew my agreement with the cellular provider, and because my hobby is my house, and quite often when I'm doing something, this phone suffers, like being hit by hammer or anything else. I looked for something like this: nice, rugged, beautiful phone with Android, everything what I need, easy migration to that, perfect. Of course, after a couple of months, my wife decided that this phone is not good for her because it hangs, it's slow, she cannot have the same applications as I do. Actually, she cannot have any applications that she wants because she also had an iPad at that time. So she said, I want this, right? And since you are buying a new or renewing your contract, maybe you could buy this for me, right? So obviously I did, right? And obviously she took it. I took that. And now imagine walking into a conference room in your company with full of guys. Everybody are putting the phones on the table, and this is me, right? There are still stories in the company, even though this was a couple of years ago, about me wearing a girly phone. So that was very nice. And so what we want to talk about today? We want to talk about decisions, making decisions, as a particular technology-centric decisions, right? How we choose, how we decide, how we do things in our day-to-day jobs, or sometimes in our life, as you can see, which are kind of around this choice of technology and basically also what will be the consequences of that, right? Because there are always, every choice comes with a consequence. And those consequences in our world, in world of the technology companies, in world of the coding, they usually translate into technical debt. You can find a couple of other measures, but today we want to kind of focus on the technical debt as the one which is always the result of making technologies choices. And as we go through this, I want to kind of point out that this is not the way. I am not here to tell you how to make the technology decisions. Honestly, because I don't know where you work. I don't know what kind of products you are doing. I don't know what kind of tools you are using. And I basically don't know you. But I want you to think, when we go through this, about your own area, your own company, your own job, and how those things work in your kind of environment, right? And why? Because I believe that everybody who kind of retrospects or reflects back on his choices, on his decisions, is much more aware. And there is a good chance, because Krakow is a very small market, actually Poland is a very small market, that one day we may work together, and I always prefer to work with people who have a kind of like a bigger picture view on things. So, first of all, are all the technology decisions limited only to technical aspects? Selecting your favorite language, library, tool, selecting the type of product that you will work on, or the company which is doing a specific or works in a specific domain? Or are there something more than that? So, actually, who we are and how we have evolved is very important to our way how we make the technology decisions. And this is not only true for the technology-related things, actually this is true for our life. And kind of a sociology or psychology, especially the neural sciences, tell us that the sum of our experiences has very big influence over the decisions that we are making. So everybody here probably went through some sort of a path of the career, right? You collected some experiences, you work in different jobs, hopefully. And you kind of collected all those experiences, also made a number of decisions in various environments, which kind of created you as you are right now, right? This is my path. Probably some of you have a very similar one, right? And the question here is, do you think your experience is important to how you make the decisions and how it impacts the things that are basically the particulars, the elements of that decision making? So, next thing. So we said, okay, our experiences. Now, what we do and where. We have our companies. Probably everybody is working. Some of you probably are freelancers, but you're still working for somebody, doing some kind of a projects. So there is a company or some kind of environment where you're working. Those companies work in a specific domain, specific context. They always have business goals. And those business goals are important because they are driving how the products are made, how the solutions are made, how the job is done, basically. You as employees or contractors or basically freelancers or whatever your kind of relation to that is, you are also motivated by certain elements. You are motivated by, of course, making money, right? We do this because we want to kind of pay the rent at the end of the day or at the end of the month. And we also may have some additional things like satisfaction. We want to learn and expand. We want to probably do a couple other things. Some of us also, which is nothing bad, go to work from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. That's it, right? This is just a job. They focus their lives somewhere else. And usually what also happens is that companies collect number of those peoples, right? This business context is then kind of put on top of those kind of companies and those people who are working for those companies and everybody who is related to them. So, do you think your judgment when you are making technology decisions is impacted by how the company works and where you work? What are the business goals? Maybe it's impacted by how the kind of a company does its own internal marketing, right? So-called propaganda or corporation propaganda. It's also very important, I believe. Okay, so our experiences, way we work and where we work, how we are motivated. Now, when we are making decisions, when you make your day-to-day decisions, because you do make them, even when you decide if this day that you will use that pattern or the other pattern, you are making a technology decision. Sometimes that has a different consequences in different timeline, right? So initially, usually the choices are very simple. Okay, I will use Java or C++, or I will use that library or the other library. Is that that's the kind of like a normal thing, right? Usually we try to simplify things that we are working on and just move on, right? And that's usually those choices have a perspective of, you know, current sprint. Okay, I will do this that way, and if not, I will refactor in the next sprint, right? So that's the kind of a one thing. There are some other decisions which are bigger, right, and which kind of impact the entire project. Now, that's a little bit longer perspective, right? It usually takes a little bit more time. Quite often is seen as more important than the decisions you are making every day when you are doing your kind of a day-to-day job. And sometimes this kind of impacts not only the project, but also product, right? So product usually is made there are a number of projects which make up the product, the eventual result of the product. When you are making decisions somewhere here, do you think that they impact how the product eventually will look like, how it will evolve? And actually the final thing that happens is that the market, so place where you put your products, market will judge everything, right? And hopefully you know and understand how the market works for your product, right? Because otherwise, some of those decisions may be very hard to project that far, right? Of course, there are many ways how the given decision can evolve. There are many factors, and there is no like, you know, well-known path or method of setting how this will evolve. But definitely, you can kind of appreciate that some of the decisions will have an impact later on. And I will have an example for you later on of that. So, how do we make decisions? Now, let's focus on the more kind of neural science, psychology aspects of this. Actually, it's believed. There are many kind of researches around this, but that's what kind of I used here as a kind of a nice simple way to put that. We are thinking or we are making decisions either intuitively, or this is based on intuitive thinking, which is kind of quite common for our society, for how we kind of function day to day with our neighbors, with our family and things. We quite often go to shortcuts, right? And it's kind of a proven in a number of ways that when we are making decisions, we are making them unconsciously, because this is the approved social way of being, right? If somebody says to you, thank you, you are most likely much more kind of a positive towards that person, even if he is trying to harm you, than the person who is definitely going to harm you, right? And this is based on how we think, how the society involved. Unfortunately, this causes additional thing. Those decisions are quite often influenced. And what's the biggest market of influence? Advertising. Advertising is the biggest market for influence, and is using that part of our decision-making process. Of course, you may say, yeah, I don't watch the advertisements, I don't follow them. True, hopefully you do that, and you make your choices much more consciously. So analytical thinking. And analytical thinking is usually what we think we do as engineers, as developers, as architects, or any other technical role. We collect facts, we analyze the facts, we'll search for alternatives, then we pick the best one, we score them, we try to kind of rationalize why they are better than the others, we try to put them into context, right? So that's what we do, at least we think we do. So eventually, actually, the neural science tells us that it's kind of a bit of both, right? Fortunately for us, since we are kind of a, how to say it, since we are kind of a built to work in the environment or in the engineering environment, that's our kind of like a social environment, is analytical thinking, is based on facts and things like that. So actually we are much more on the other side. But we still do we are being influenced by that. Where is the experience in that, right? Actually, experience is on both places, because experience builds the intuitive way of thinking, because you collect your experiences and you are able to kind of automatically think that, well, using that pattern over this pattern is probably better, but also analytical thinking, right? So this is like an additional factor, not the way of making decisions. Now, here we could jump to another presentation, right? What about the team? How the team impacts your decisions? People you work with every day, their motivations, their likes and dislikes, what they want to do, what they don't want to do. That's a different story, right? We don't want to talk here about this. There are probably many trainings, agile trainings, team build-ups, which we'll talk about this. And of course, there are many ways to go about that. But that's also an important factor of it. So, an example. So I said about a couple of things. Basically, where we are, what we do, what the company we are working on, what's the context of our work makes the difference, right? And sometimes the decisions that we are making have effects or the consequences later on, right? So I want to give you an example of one of the solutions. Usually I do 3, but since I have 45 minutes, not 1.5 hours, I will do just 1, which I think is also quite relevant. Typical system. One guy told me that all the architects are drawing their systems like 2 boxes and 1 database here, and some arrows, right? So this product, quite typical, nothing fancy. Built for network management of large telecommunication systems, hundreds of systems, thousands of instances, usually working alone, right? This is not like a big system, but there are a number of customers who bought this system. Life expectancy, 20 plus years. 20 plus. You release the product and you can expect that this product will work for 20 years. Imagine that. Various system flavors. So there are so many combinations of the telecommunication systems that you can imagine yourself how different kind of what are the different ways that they can be built on. Quite typical stack, at least 10 years ago when it was built. Today probably it would be different, but that's it. Okay, and some story around this. So that's a kind of a perspective on this project for 10 plus years. What was happening over the 10 plus years? And we have some timeline, we have some depth, right? So we kind of used that to estimate the depth that we were making different decisions. Before we started working on this product, we actually already had a previous solution, which had also a kind of like a technical depth already, right? So somebody said, well, yeah, there is no point of doing that anymore. Let's try to do something new, right? It will probably be better than what we have right now. So, as any new solution, usually you are trying to pick something which is current, which is better, which is somehow ready. Usually you are starting from a lower level of the technical depth that you are already in, right? So you are starting from something, but it's never zero. It's always, every decision is kind of transformed eventually into some sort of technical depth. So solution refresh. At some point, there were a number of guys. This was an engineering architecture decision. Number of guys working in the business structures who made the decision what kind of a framework we will use for that. So this is the first bad thing that happened. Actually, business guys, marketing guys who didn't know how the system works even then, now they are making decisions about, yeah, let's pick this vendor because they are cheaper, right? Good, perfect. So they did what I called is risk-taking by risk avoidance. Probably some of you who work in the corporations, they know what's a risk avoidance. Risk avoidance is let's not do anything because something bad can happen, right? So they said, okay, we are not taking risk. We are take this framework. We will take the company, external company who knows how to deal with this project. Good, we are set to go. So they were thinking that they were doing with the debt, when actually they were doing this. So over 5 years, they did a couple of things. There were a couple of things that happened. If you outsource something to a company who doesn't know how things work, because they had a long history of other stuff, eventually they will make poor designs, poor tests, poor implementations, and of course they will do one more thing. They will mind to their business, so they will lock you in, right? So you need to be very careful to not to end up here in the vendor lock-in scenario, when actually you are bound to other company and their kind of a technology debt with your own, right? Eventually, once this happened, it took a couple of years of refactoring, fixing, and reshaping the product to put it into like a little bit better order, right? To kind of try to come down to the baseline of what they were assuming at that point. Along that, there were a number of this wasn't very kind of a nice thing, right? So now look at this already. This is almost 8 years out, and those decisions which were taken here somewhere by the people who are thinking that they are doing the best job that they can, they cost a lot of kind of a trouble, and also they cost a lot of money, right? Because the technical debt, eventually, if you want to reduce it, it's expensive. Now, at some point, the team took over the whole full responsibility for the product. Good, right? Now we can do whatever we want. So I call it, this is also my favorite kind of a mistake when making technology decisions, is curse of prototype. So you are doing a prototype, and then you are showing to nice, smart business guys. And because you want to sell the product, you are making it as a kind of like a marketing presentation. It does everything for you, right? It's perfect. And they buy it. And they say, okay, so when can you have it ready? Or no, or even better, they are selling it to somebody without telling you, right? So, of course, you all know that usually 95% of time you are spending on that 5% of the implementation that is left to be finished, right? So unfortunately, that was the issue here. So again, the team was thinking, we are doing the right thing, right? We are prototyping, we are selling, we are expanding our roadmap, we will provide a new great features for the customers. Again, they were a little bit wrong, because those prototypes were not that kind of ready yet as any prototype. And it basically, first of all, it required some work and some kind of cuts in order to make the times and deadlines, and some compromise designs. Actually, compromise design is not that bad thing, because sometimes it can work in favor, but in this case, it did, but it can also be an opposite. At the initial success, so also in a big companies, usually projects end up with success no matter what. So marketing said, you are so good at this that now we'll give you 10 more projects, right? So then you have a project congestion. You are trying to make the thing that is for 50 people with 10 people team. Okay, they may be very good, but basically they are also limited to their kind of 8 or 9 hours in a job, or sometimes with overtime, right? And actually that caused a number of other things. At some point, this was too big to fall, right? You know how probably some of you watched the movie, or you know that this relates to the kind of a financial crisis. Basically, the product was in so many deployments, in so many different customers, that it was bound to be sustained. It was bound to be developed further. It was bound to be maintained. Now, imagine the pain that somebody who is working for that team has, right? Because this project is basically maintenance, fixing, maintenance, debugging, fixing, maintenance, sometimes new feature and things like that. Hopefully, because that team had ownership, they decided to look for alternatives. And actually that probably was something that somebody should do here instead of sometimes they thought that because they are avoiding the risk, they will save some money, but actually they are spending much more. When actually, if they would kind of develop two alternatives in parallel, probably it would cost less than what those decisions were kind of causing here. So quite often those decisions are made with a very short perspective. There is no distant perspective, especially if you are not aware that some of your decisions may kind of end up being kind of distributed among the vast organization, and they will have a lasting effects for years. And here you have. By the way, this product will continue for next 20 years or so. So it's a very costly thing. Okay, there were a number of kind of points when somebody made the decision. So actually, who does those decisions? I would say everybody. Everybody is making decision. If you mess up the algorithm for the processing of the queue, which kind of is designed to kind of take all the incoming traffic, probably initially, if you are not expecting that the systems will have to handle 10 times more than you are expecting, nothing bad will happen. But eventually, even that decision may lead to a kind of a, I don't know, deadlock, some kind of other performance issue in the field, and then somebody will have to fix it, right? And then this is a kind of a technical debt. Everybody are making decisions. Managers, developers, testers. It's not limited to this kind of a group of so-called decision makers. That's true. Those guys are supposed to be trained in helping to make decisions or taking the responsibility for some decisions eventually. But it's not true that they are the only ones who are making those decisions. And if they are they probably end up doing the same thing as in that project, because they won't have this perspective. I'm sorry, I am calling myself an architect, but probably there are a number of guys in my team who know the coding better than I am. I didn't do that for like 2 years, and in a way not day to day, like they are doing. So I better rely on their kind of judgments and not try to be like a, this kind of almost like a full, responsible, all-knowing, all kind of dancing guy. So you need to also remember that those decision makers are always influenced by somebody, and they are always distracted by somebody. So when it comes to decisions, there is always 10 people who will want to cut in and make the decision with you, right? So you need to be able to recognize and think whether you have people like that. When you think you are ready to make a decision, there is one guy who is coming in and saying, you know what, I think it's wrong. We need to do something else, right? So you need to be able to recognize people who are influencers and they have good decisions, or they may have a good input, like a business guy, a marketing guy. He's probably not the one who should make the decision, but he should influence the decision by providing his own perspective on things, and which are distractors. So guys who you should listen, but then kind of move on. What drives the decision? Yeah, I said, okay, experience, capabilities, organization, strategy, portfolio. True, all true. Context of where you are working, what you are doing, what kind of product is that, and what's your own motivation is important. But also remember that we are all human, and we are all impacted by this kind of intuitional or intuitive or kind of unconscious thinking. So quite often the decisions are made by CV. It will basically look better in my CV. I did it once, so I know. Fear, arrogance. Arrogance is painful because it's very hard to tell to somebody who is arrogant that he is arrogant. He will usually be arrogant and will kind of ignore you. Conferences, that's the perfect place where the decisions are made, because I heard about this nice library that the guy was showing. It was magic. In 50 minutes he wrote the entire application, honestly. So number of things. Remember about them. They are important. there are important parameter of the decision making. It's you and what's your motivation and what's basically you as a person. When the decisions are made, yeah, probably number of guys will say waterfall. What the waterfall is doing there? This is dead already, right? Agile, yeah, that's it. Actually, the decisions are made continuously and all the time in all the phases. And unfortunately, in case of the waterfall, they are made in sequential manner. So if they are made in sequential manner, the technical debt has a tendency to accumulate over time. Agile is a little bit better with that because it tries to reflect back periodically on the decisions made, right? By doing retrospectives, if these are truly the retrospectives and not the hour of complaining, right? Because this is not what the retrospective is all about. So agile is probably better. That's why agile is treated as a good kind of a solution for this. So decisions are made. Usually, those are the results of this. These are the usually things that are associated with those decisions. So promise of better life. Yes, this will be better, right? This will be definitely better solution than the one we had. This library is better than the other one. It was written by the more smart people than the previous were. Risk taking, risk avoidance. Again, my good one. Probably number of things that I could put here, but eventually, once you'd made them, that's it. You are cooked. You are bound to increase your technical debt, and you are bound to also deal with this later. And you are dealing with this. So poor design. If you make a bad design decision and you don't reflect back and you don't back off and don't assume that or don't accept the fact that you made the bad decision, poor design, poor implementation, other things. And my favorite thing is here. It's around here. No results, no customers, no business. So making things perfect. Perfect. I will code this incredibly. We will keep 100% of coverage. True. Maybe it's possible. Not in the big projects, I would like to see that. Trying to make things so perfect that you actually end up missing the deadlines, missing the market, missing the customers. Then you are dead, right? Unfortunately, this is what happens with the startups. Lots of startups end up in this place because they had they made the bad decisions about the technologies or the kind of a functionality, or they were trying to do this so perfect at this phase that it failed. Shelf product is also a similar thing. So you develop the perfect product, which is only good for the shelf, because you forget that you have a customers who you need to kind of work with. And at the end, there is always some guy in your company who says, "I told you so. This would happen," right? So it's usually he looks usually like this. All right, some observations. First of all, decision making is a continuous process, and in every organization, especially yours, especially in your day-to-day job, it has to work some way. Try to think how it works. I don't know. You should be able to identify this. You should be also able to identify who is the owner of those decisions, who usually makes those decisions, and try to think, is that the right person? Is that done on the right level? Does this person or that role has all the information which are necessary to make the technical decisions, especially if it comes to the coding or selection of the technology, like actual technology that the product will be implemented with. Because sometimes it's probably better to have a usually not easy discussion with somebody and try to convince him, you know what, probably it will be better if you left this in my hands, right? I am probably more aware of how this will work. Tell me what I need to know, or let me work with you so I can understand what's the kind of what are the elements that are, what are the factors that are important, but eventually this. Be aware of your context. Are you aware of how the products are sold? Who are your customers? Who is actually buying the products, and what's the model of selling things? Do you have an access to feedback, right? Agile is all about feedback. Do you really can say that in your organization, in your projects, if you're of course working in an agile project, do you really have the access to a feedback from a customer or from the market? Sometimes it's not necessarily the customer, but also the market. Who is your customer? Do you know that? That's kind of a, also you should think about this, because many decisions should be made for the customers, since we are trying to build the products for them, not only for us. Tough decisions. Sometimes there is no best choice. There is no kind of a golden solution for everything. Always has to be some made, so you always need to kind of look for ways to make a compromise, because sometimes the compromise, which may not necessarily look good at this point, may be probably a chance to focus on something else, what is more important, right? So think that whether this is a fundamental approach, right? So it will be my way or no way, or whether there is some kind of room for alternatives and other things. Remember when I was describing this kind of a project, the problem was that nobody thought about the alternatives at the beginning of the project, when there was a huge pile of money waiting, and it could be spent much better than just hiring an external company, an outsourcing company who will do this for us. Okay, so try to think if that's true or not. And again, I will not tell you that something is true or not. It's my kind of an own opinion on this. That for the engineers, big picture is not the technology stack. I'm sorry to say that, but in my opinion, it's not, right? I can do things with the Node.js as well as I can do with the Java. In various circumstances, they won't work the same. They won't work for the best of the product or the solution, but I can probably do this. Hell, I can probably do the same with the C++. If I am really masochistic, I would probably also go with the assembler if I want to, right? And it will still work. So big picture is not the technology stack. Technical debt, it's not old technology stack. Again, my opinion, you should think about this, look at your products, look at the projects that you are doing, and think that, is it better to have a good solution, good design, good code with the older version of the C++ compiler, or the latest, greatest with a crappy design and lack of tests? Technical debt is always there. I don't believe that you can avoid it. You always will have a technical debt, because the decisions you are making are not perfect, so they come with a price. Now, one interesting thing that we started to do in number of projects in over a couple of years, along with our technical roadmaps and business roadmaps, we also tried to estimate the coming technical debt. So what will be the cost of what will be the additional cost of doing things which are based on those decisions? So I know that if I need to provide this feature to the customer, probably in 5 years I will have a performance issue, right? Is it acceptable or not? That depends on the project. We also try to reflect back and think, okay, so what were our decisions? Were those decisions good or not? And what did they cost? That's the graph there. You may use different techniques of scoring the technical debt, since technical debt is always there. So when is it acceptable for you? Maybe it's this. Maybe it's technical debt times business results and time perspective, right? Even the crappiest product which sells probably is good for the company, better than the product which is actually on the shelf. It's perfect, but nobody wants to buy it, right? So try to think about this. Maybe this also brings some relevance to this. I always believed that the agile techniques help, but the agile I am talking about is not the agile that you would hear about on the conference, on the agile conferences. And I'm sorry there's somebody here from that, because I think you need to also apply common sense to the agile. If you read the agile manifest literally, you will literally fail, because those are guidelines, right? Not actual rules. And that common agile helps, or common sense agile helps, because, like I said, it allows you to reflect back on the decisions made, as long as you are true to yourself and you can admit that the decisions you made were wrong, and you are not afraid of refactoring or doing things like that. Retrospect further. Actually, this is because of the short and long or distant perspective. You cannot just retrospect only to a last sprint. You should at some time, not always, not with every sprint, not with every retrospective, but sometimes you need to have a chance to think back through the project, maybe through some other decisions, maybe some related decisions, because otherwise you are just focusing on that short perspective, and that may be not enough. Think about this. Think about how you are doing your retrospectives, whether you think about the bigger picture decisions that were made, which actually impacted the fact that you are not able to finish sprint over sprint. Depending on the product you are working on. Some products are fast. It really depends on the ways that the product are made and what are the time frames and timelines. It will be probably different for the companies who are doing like a continuous deployment on the web. They have just single instance of their web portal or whatever the web system or online system is. It will be probably different for the teams who are doing like a box products. So box that go into the shop and somebody can buy it. It will be probably yet different for the companies who are doing like a systems integration, which they have different perspective. But depending on that, there may be a different balance of persistence, consequence, and patience, which need to be applied to a decision making and to weigh how you select the technology for that. Plan and replan future and alternatives at hand. Even if somebody is not paying you for the alternatives, if you are making a technology decision, try to think if you have at least one alternative at hand, right? If you can offer something else, if by any chance this will not work, right? Usually it helps, especially with this long perspective, right? To have some alternatives already kind of prepared, at least some ideas of what this can be. And plan and replan the future. I don't probably have to tell you about the importance of road mapping and kind of trying to understand how the products will evolve, which is also based on the customer feedback. And eventually, a technical debt is like a monster, and since everybody is making decisions, everybody is bound to make technical decisions. So everybody needs to kind of accept it, because otherwise, and try to harness it, right? Not try to avoid it, not try to kind of escape from it, saying, yeah, our decisions are good, we don't have any technical debt. Okay, interesting. So if you don't learn how to accept it and control it, it will probably eat you at the end of the day, right? All right, so hopefully this was something that this was more like a food for thought than actually a way to tell you how to make technology decisions. Try to think about, when you come back to your teams, to your groups, try to think about those aspects. Try to think who is making technology decisions, how this is made, what are the motivations, do you understand the customers in context? And good luck with your projects. Thank you.